Salut et bienvenue à the 55, votre destination pour le football U-Sports. Tom et moi sommes de retour au micro avec un nouveau épisode de notre série Exit Meeting. Cette semaine, on fait un détour par la belle Provence pour parler de les Redbirds de McGill. On va revenir sur la saison qui vient de se terminer, analyser les joueurs clés, les moments marquants et discuter de qui s'en vient pour le programme. Mais avant tout ça, Tom, comment ça va, mon ami?
Ça va très bien, mon ami. As always, I am so impressed with the amount of French that you know. Duolingo is only helping me oh so much here, but I am so excited to be talking a little McGill Redbird football. A year that was so close to being a historic back to where they should be type of year that ended up being another 2-6 type of season. But we'll break it down all of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's get right into it. We kind of start off with a little preamble, and obviously, when we talk about these teams out of the OUA, it's a little more challenging, perhaps, for me to just throw your way the classic close your eyes, think of the 2025 insert team here, tell me what you think. But, I will say that, but I'll even set up off the jump that I feel like McGill is one of these teams that, we were talking a bit beforehand of like, there's like a handful of clubs that have been especially fruitful for our deep diving of them during this process of a couple clubs that were much more of the unknowns, and McGill was sort of teetering on that level, obviously with what La Tendresse Régime Ball had been doing since winning a Rookie of the Year award winner and now being the all-time McGill touchdown leader, are getting to meet our dude and JT Copeland Lewis the year that Jerry Momo had, and of course them winning over Montreal in that electric game they had mid-season. It was hard not to take notes on them. And I say all that because I guess my almost answer to that question in general of like, what do you think of this team? And you alluded to it in your little intro there is like, sometimes it's hard not knowing the full background of this team, these teams to be able to say like, you were so close and but you know what? Like you're in a tough league and you got Laval and you got Montreal. It's like, honestly, I look at this year for McGill and I'm like, guys, like you look at there's a lot of youth, we'll go through the youth. But there's a lot of key players here where it's like, we don't know who's going to be back here. It's like, guys, I'm not saying that they were going to win a Dussault this year. I mean, they almost upset Laval in that quarterfinal game. They were certainly like, had their hair on fire to begin with. But I'm like, fellas, like a couple of these games, like, pretty major disappointments, I got to say. Again, as a guy who doesn't really know that much about RCQ football and learning more and more, I feel confident of saying that, like, frankly, when I think of the 2025 Redbirds, yeah, that huge moment against Montreal. Yeah, Jerry Momo, first team All Canadian, ELR, all time touchdown record setter, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, 2-6, big letdown.
No kidding, especially when you look at some of the games that are in here. Obviously, the two wins, the first home opener against Sherbrooke, 38-22, and then that electric victory against Montreal, 31-24. But the second time they play against Montreal, it's 28-21 going into the fourth quarter, and Montreal comes away with 11 points unanswered. But like you had the Vanier Cup champions number, and you could have beat them twice in a row. As you mentioned, it's 14-0 in the first quarter, at the end of the first quarter for McGill against Laval in that quarterfinal game. Like there's so much potential that's in here, not to mention the fact that they lost to Sherbrooke the second time around. And again, you start looking at things, and obviously, when you think McGill football, you think of that run game. That's incredible. Dominic Piazza as the All-Canadian up front at that center position. He's been phenomenal for them for a number of years. But it's Jerry Momo and ELR running the ball in particular. They were 4 and 5 respectively in all of U Sports in terms of their rushing capabilities. And so they're gaining a bunch of yards. They're number 5 in U Sports for rush. And then you start looking at, okay, well, what's their scoring like? Well, they're 15th on a team in a league of 27. And then you go, well, what was their defense like? And defensive points per game is at 21. So obviously that tells a bit of a story right there. You've got some outstanding players. Obviously, your dude in Copeland Lewis on the defensive side being their lone All-Canadian on the defense, but they needed a few more pieces to come together, and they could have seriously had, if not a 500 season, maybe even more than that going into this year.
Well, and it's interesting to think about that electric output they had against Montreal to pick up the win. And as you alluded to, like they're up in the game, the second outing against them. And I'm just trying to pull up the numbers in specific because you have, Momo rushes for 182 on the ground and ELR adds in 184. Just an outstanding day, as you alluded to, against a great rush defense to begin with. But that's also a game for Momo in specific where he's coming back off a 1-game suspension, missing that Concordia game that they end up losing to the Stingers. So, there's a part of me that's like thinking about how, like, number one, like, I guess they've kind of proven that they can take on Montreal, like, irrespective of an extra rested Momo not coming off suspension or an extra motivated guy being like, wow, like, can you imagine the feeling of that young man? And when we talk about young man, again, with all the RCQ teams, you often get, slightly older rookies, but a first year by all accounts, like a 20-year-old rookie, nonetheless, as a CJET product, but he's a first year on the first team All-Canadian team. Kid's a dude, dude's a guy, guy's the man. Like, awesome stuff he's doing. But imagine as a first-year kid on this team with all this talent, especially on the offensive side, knowing that you're sitting there watching your team in Concordia, crosstown rival, you drop that game and you're just thinking, wow, like what if? And of course, then you end up dropping that game later on to them as well, where it's that same story that you're talking about, where a lot of offense, a lot of rushing specifically, and the defense just doesn't hold up. We were kind of playing around with it kind of smelt a little bit like when we were talking about Alberta a bit, where it was like, the offense, like, no matter who was kind of in at QB was moving the ball pretty well and they could rush it a little bit but the scoring didn't really match with the yardage output. And then the defense was kind of letting them down. And though Alberta is not many years off of raising a Hardy Cup, I feel like at least when you just compare a lot of the changes around that program, Coach Bone coming in, stuff like that, where it's like, I still feel like I'm okay saying to Alberta this year, being like, hey, look, like that was a supremely good Sask and Regina team, like kind of leading the charge in your conference. And obviously the same is true for Laval and Montreal for McGill. But I just feel that much stronger being like, yeah, but come on, pull it together, guys.
Well, certainly. I mean, the story of the tape here when you're looking at this season is the fourth quarter. And there's so many times they struggled. In that second game against Montreal, like we were mentioning, Montreal scored 11-0 to win that game. In the first game against Concordia, it's 16-11 going into the fourth quarter, and then Concordia rattles off 16 points in the fourth to come away with that game. Same thing with Laval, obviously Laval being earlier on, but McGill comes at all of these teams with this solid punch on offense. They're moving the ball, they're able to run, they're doing a bunch of things, but they just can't seem to hold it, which to me is really interesting because especially a team that is so built to run the ball, you should be able to just churn out the clock and completely own time of possession and everything. But, it's just obviously really not what we saw here whatsoever.
No, it's a strange thing to see, and we've talked about some of these players. Let's go into a bit more of a deep dive of it, and we can kind of keep going back to these games because, like, at a certain point, we need to just talk about the career of La Tendresse Régime. But when we talk about some of those All Canadians, and I think primarily looking back at Domenico Piazza as not only that first team All Canadian at center, but also a fifth-year guy. So in all likelihood, he's out of there. Jerry Momo, the first year team All-Canadian. That's outstanding. Our guy, JT Copeland-Lewis, who also was an East-West participant last year, defensive MVP of that game. Again, he's draft eligible. That'll be interesting to see. And again, as someone who's spent, because I think he hails from down south, Texas, if memory serves, where again, I believe he then has that national status, which is obviously really beneficial for them as well. But I didn't actually clock this though. In addition to Copeland Lewis being at East West, but they also had Felix Olivier Leclerc on the O line at that East West game, as well as Brandon Ciccarello in the running backfield. So bringing up those names, one to sort of highlight again, who that top talent is on this team. And again, that's not without even mentioning ELR in specific and a lot of these young guys on defense. But you can say, okay, you got a guy in Piazza all Canadian at center. He's probably out, but you got an East Wester in Leclerc. I don't know exactly where he played on the line. I think you might have the depth chart up in front of you, and then you think, all right, first year in Jeremy Momo, who's an all Canadian, but then you got a guy who's a few years senior to him in Ciccarello, who obviously adds that extra depth to it, which goes back to your point of being like, how couldn't you grind out these games? Why? Like it seems so antithetical to the way this team's built that they're not able to, sort of get that done. But again, without even going into like most of those aside from our guy in JT, we're talking about names on the offensive side of the ball. And much like we've talked about with some of these teams being in this position of, well, they could be back, they could not be back. In the most optimistic viewpoint of the guys that are back, you say Piazza, he's out, and there's other guys as well. But as far as just these kind of top names, as far as like all-star, all-Canadian, East-West recognition type deal, it's like he's out for sure. Beyond that, if you pull all these guys back, that defense matures up a little bit, which might be as simple an explanation and as valid an explanation as you need of like, look, they need to mature and learn how to close games and such. Again, like this coming year is a very scary prospect for the RCQ of what this Redbird team can be with some of these names.
Certainly, when you look at the amount of talent they have that they should be returning, obviously losing a guy like Piazza on that offensive line and Zachary Aboud, who I believe played left guard for them as well. Those are two big losses that they'll have to look at refilling there. But number of guys back on that offense, including obviously ELR and Jerry Momo, the heart of that run game at the bare minimum. On the defensive side, they are losing a few guys here, but still, like, they're losing a number of guys from the back end. I believe Thomas Raphael and Ryan McNally were both fifth-year guys who should be moving on. Teddy Charlotte and Jonathan Montour, again, two more fifth-year guys on the front, up front on that defense, but like, all those linebackers, I think the oldest linebacker there is a third year, maybe a fourth year, but most of them are second or first year guys who are there. A number of first year defensive linemen that actually saw some legitimate playing time here as well. So this is a young team that's only going to get better. But again, you start looking at things and you say, you're not young forever. ELR, as you pointed out to me before we started here, just finished his fourth year. He'll likely be back for a fifth year, but then that's it. Then obviously you've still got Jerry Momo, and as long as everything stays healthy, whatever, you'll have him for a number of years. But your key guys are starting to get a little older here. Piazza, your all-star, all-Canadian center is gone. JT Copeland-Lewis is gone. Like there's a number of guys who are starting to get older here. And you're starting to think like, McGill, if there's a time that you want to turn the corner, I think it's got to be in this 26th season.
Well, I think JT, again, I think there's a chance. I think he could be back. I think it's his draft year. Correct?
I think he might be done.
But he was in East West last year.
But I think it's age-wise as well.
Oh, actually, yeah. You were able to figure out a little bit of that? I don't know if you want to share what we learned about how the eligibility piece with the or was that
eligibility with CJFL is anytime you play football in a professional, semi-professional, whatever you want to say setting that is past the age of 20, that counts as a year of eligibility, exactly like as if you were at a university. So if you go right in from high school and you played CJFL when you're 18 and 19, you're good. You're clear. You still got all 5 years. But if you start playing in your 20s, then you're starting to eat into your eligibility here. I think that's why CJEP is exempt, because you should finish CJEP before you turn 20. If I understand that correctly, and then you're right back into it and you have your 5 years. But I think the cap is that you can't play once you're past 25. So I think that's where JT Copeland-Lewis might be in. I'd have to confirm that, but I think that's where he's at.
Totally fair. Again, salute to you, JT. Heck of a career. Hopefully you're getting drafted. I would imagine very high likelihood of it happening. Now, you mentioned with ELR that maybe he comes back. What do we think about this? Number one, and we were kind of talking about this a bit before, where the hell was his invite to East West last year? Because I mean, like, we were going through it, Alex Vreeken, totally fine. Anton Ammonrud, totally fine. But then past then, we're getting into the Nick Orr and the freaking tight end fullback out of Western name I'm is eluding me right now.
Jerome Rancourt.
Rome Rancourt. Je suis désolé, Rancourt. But where you're thinking like something stinks in that if ELR is not getting an invite to that. But with what he's done in terms of his production throughout his career, I was trying to pull up his career numbers, but former rookie of the year, like the rushing yards is truly what makes him so spectacular. Not to say he's inept in passing the ball, and Simmons is another one of his wideouts that he'll be losing this year. So again, in terms of how that can impact the whole offense. But when you look at just the immense talent of this young man, and he's spent time with the with the Alouettes in terms of that, I forget what they call that U Sport CFL connection thing that they do that so many of our great quarterbacks have done over the years. But when you look at his play style, and we were kind of talking about this, and we'll get into it more later on, or I guess maybe this is the moment of he might have like the highlight of the U Sports year, which was that 68-yard scamper against Laval, either putting them up 7-0 or 14-0 in that playoff game. That was just so darn electric until Laval just decided to start playing football and goes on a 30-point whatever run. He is absolutely dynamic. He has that connection with the CFL. But when you think about some of the quarterbacks of recent years we've seen make that jump, yes, many of them have some of that talent with their legs, but does his game seem like it's almost too slanted towards what truly makes him like out of this world great? And it's the thing with small conferences where they typically only have one team of all-stars. So, he doesn't even get an all-star nod this year, which seems odd, but I mean, at the same time, you're not going to give it to him. Again, when there's only so few options there. What do you make of his play style in terms of how we see quarterbacks make that jump? Does it gel with what your image of just like close your eyes, picture a CFL quarterback is, specifically if it's a Canadian one? Do you think he has the opportunity to get someone take his rights, send him back? What do you think this spring holds for ELR?
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what ends up happening for him. To me, the best comparison that I can kind of think of somebody that obviously just finished up their playing career this year, at least at the university level, was Jackson Tuchinski. I don't know that ELR has the same cannon of an arm that Tuchinski does, but very similar style in that, he's got one read, maybe two, and if that's not there, he's using his legs and he's taking off because he's one of the best to do it when he's on the ground. In my opinion, I think that does hurt his CFL prospects as a quarterback. Let's not forget that Tuchinski was invited out to go to the combine last year, as he did take a couple reps at quarterback, I believe, but a lot of the time was spent as a receiver, trying to showcase the fact that he has hands and that he can run and whatever else. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's more so the case for ELR. I mean, his numbers in the regular season, at least, 104 for 223, 46% completion rating, averaging 217 yards per game, 9 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Nothing to write home about by any means, but when you look over at the rushing side of things, and you've got 66 rushes for 798 yards and 7 touchdowns, and then your running back, the running back, the first team All-Canadian running back, 96 rushes for 833 yards and 7 touchdowns. Like, the two of them were neck and neck in there. But again, very interesting, as I looked it up here, they are 20th in U Sports in terms of time of possession, despite the fact that they run the football so often. So I thought that was super interesting to kind of note here. But I think all of those things together, I don't know how well that translates for ELR going into this one. I think this year in particular for him is going to be really, really important for his own personal development and for the development of McGill as a whole. He's been getting better from previous years, not turning the ball over as much, but it is still an issue here. It was told to us by somebody that's close to the program, who's out in the RSEQ, that it's less so like, how is McGill going to win? And it's more so, how's McGill going to lose this? And that's
Mm.
been kind of the butt of the joke for a number of years here, where, it's a collapse in the fourth quarter, like we saw. It's a couple of key fumbles or interceptions or turnovers in general. Like there's just a couple of things that McGill has seen over a number of years, which I think has brought a lot of that into light here. And again, we've said it so often, but it keeps bearing repeating. Like there's something to be said about learning how to win football games, how to close out a game when you have a lead, how to make sure that you come out on top and not just giving things away. So there's a number of things that this McGill team as a whole needs to get better at, but I think just seeing a marked improvement from ELR from 2 years ago to last year, I'm hoping that same trajectory happens going into 26 as long as he is back. And I think that will mean a lot of really great things for the Redbirds.
I love the Jackson Tuchinski comparison. As you referenced the idea of maybe he takes a look or they ask him to take a look at changing positions, I'm just like, ooh, Brad Sinopoli 2.0.
Ooh.
And then you mentioned this idea of windows. Again, it's worth saying that it's hard, like this is the bane of every U Sport fan's existence to try to, though no one hesitates to make these comparisons, but the cross conference comparisons of like, well, how good is such and such a team if they played in such and such a conference? The rubber's going to hit the road for Justin Quillerion and his Bishop's Gators returning to the RCQ next year, but I feel like them and McGill will really be a really fascinating battle in that third, fourth spot there. And it's fascinating to think about, well, with how dominant this attack is with ELR, with Momo, with guys like Ciccarello, where you think like, well, all right, do you just load up the box on these guys? Because as you said, he's got the arm. Yes, he's losing a few of these guys at wideout, but I don't know. It'd be fascinating to see what it holds in store for him moving forward. Now, on the defensive side, this is where, to me, again, like we can talk about all these guys on the offensive side of being like, well, if all these guys are back, and well, they got some holes in the offensive line that they need to the backfill. And yes, there's a couple guys like a Leclerc who is an East-Wester that might be able to be a more prominent figure on that O line. But it's on the defensive side, and it kind of alluded to this, where like, yeah, if JT's gone, that's a big loss. But when you look across the board, and then Ryan McNally, another DB who's probably out of there for them as well. But you look at guys like David Gauthier Gonzalez, third-year linebacker, 4 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. You look at a guy like Philippe Bouteau, who's getting, however many tackles. I feel like when I looked at the McGill page, it's higher than it was on the U Sports page. But either way, he's leading the team in tackles. Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Bouteau being a second-year kid, you look at a DB in Hugo Chevalier, who's gotten, where was I? Had the interception numbers, wherever that was. Oh, no interception, but a couple forced fumbles up there as well. First year DB. You got Ambro Duplessis, Giraud, first year on the D line. You got Frederic Beneteau, first year D lineman. Between the two of them, getting 5.5 sacks. Across the two of them. You got what was the guy's name? Pilar, the Sam linebacker for them. Mathis Pilar, second year, or pardon me, I guess third year Sam linebacker. And that might be enough to be able to explain that whole learning how to win, where this is a team that's now kind of had their, to walk out of some of these key games, both against teams that they should be saying, that dang Concordia team, that dang Sherbrooke team does not deserve to be winning games over us and having their tail between their legs with that, while also walking out of a game against the Montreals and Lavals being like, gentlemen, if there's any question we can play with the best of the best, like throw that out the window. So to me, like obviously if ELR gets drafted and sticks, then like there's so much to have to figure out with this team. It truly just becomes Momo's team entirely on the offense side of the ball. But this defense, I think, could become a really viable option for them. And if there's one thing that we see time in, time out, year in, year out, decade after decade in the RCQ, despite the umpteen number of terrific offensive players throughout the RCQ, it comes down to having great defenses. That's that wins you. I keep forgetting the new trophies called.
Do so.
So I keep on saying Duplessis. That's what you win Duxo Cups for these teams. And I think that's actually just reading the roster where I think there has to be the most excitement. And I think explains a lot of those hiccups that we saw last year for them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the youth that they have on defense is going to help out tremendously. I think losing some of those key guys up front, though, on that D line is definitely going to hurt. There was a number of guys on that in first and second year, like you were mentioning, that got some serious playing time and were able to do their thing. But as you and I both know, the games are won and lost in the trenches, and especially against the Montreal and against the Lavals of the world, you got to be able to have outstanding O and D line play if you want to be able to come out on top of that. So be interested to see how those young guys up front continue to evolve. It is also worth noting here that this is the going into in 26, going into the third year of this new coaching staff with Alex Soupranet as the head coach, along with his guys that are in here as well. So young guys in there still finding out, the McGill way, or installing and doing their own thing from that standpoint, but obviously really close in a number of key games here. So oftentimes it can take some coaches some learning points and some learning techniques and say, this is what we need to do in order to finish out a game here. This is how we need to go about this. So there's a lot of youth, whether that's actual years, playing years, or even coaching years on this McGill staff that's only going to get better and better as years go on. So I think that this could be a really impressive year, a really important year. Well, sorry, this is going to be a very important year for McGill going into 26, but we could see a drastic jump if key guys come back in key places and they learn how to close out games when they're up.
Most certainly. And I mean, the truth of the matter with the RCQ right now, sort of regardless of what Bishop's looks coming back home, is just with Pepe Gonzalez going into his second year, with how young that defense is. Yes, we could talk about Laval having, losing Arnaud Desjardins. I think Olivier Cool is probably going to be moving on from that program. But what made them so scary, frankly, in the last couple of years we were looking at them, was how young that defense was for them. And that's what we kind of just keep coming back to with these teams, is that it all starts on that defensive side of the ball and those linemen that are just, so just gargantuan for those clubs. So there does seem to be that window, but it does very much seem to be, Montreal's world right now. The rest of these teams are just living in it. But it'll be interesting to see what Bishops does coming back into it. And nonetheless, I mean, again, this is one of two teams in all of U Sports in McGill that was able to beat the Carabin last year. I mean, Tom, I guess, worth shouting out Mario Delefrin, who is the only other all-star that we haven't really mentioned as far as the kicker. And, again, a lot of these close, nip and tuck games in the RCQ, and especially with weather being a factor as it always is, or at least always can be in Quebec, is obviously a comforting thing. Second year kid, so that's obviously positive for this team. There is signs that defense might improve, despite obviously, as you alluded to, some veterans on that front end of the defense perhaps moving on, which, yes, is reason to have pause. But nonetheless, this is a team that I'm rather excited about seeing that continued growth. And I love that you brought up the coaching staff almost as reflective as anything else of maybe needing that growth and kind of being able to sort of firmly plant the flag of like, here is what McGill Redbird football is all about. What other notes did you have about this club? I mean, I guess we didn't dive too much into that Laval playoff game, beyond just saying again, like, they shocked the world for a quarter and change until, what everyone bet on came to fruition. What else did you want to talk about with these Redbirds?
Yeah, I mean, that Laval game, like we mentioned, 14-0 in the first quarter, which is great. And then in the second quarter alone, Laval scores 32 unanswered. So, how much you really want to talk about that. The other side of this as well is if I have this correct, I think there's going to be 4 receivers that are going to be moving on next year. Darius Simmons, David Kabawe, Josh Campbell, and Charles Olivier Cyr, who are all listed as potentially fifth or transfer years. So losing a bunch of guys in the receiving room is certainly something else that I wanted to highlight here. But I don't know. I think that this is still To me, obviously, you still have Jerry Momo. He burst out onto the scene and is obviously one of the best running backs that we have in Canada, period, here. But I think with ELR in the backfield as well, you've always have a chance to win games. I think that as long as, like I said, he continues to improve, continues to take care of the football, and it continues to be that explosive player that we know, I think that McGill is going to be in positions to win games. But like, it really, we can't overstate the fact of these fourth quarter breakdowns. Again, the first time they play against Concordia scores 16 in the fourth quarter to win that game. Montreal the second time, 11 points to win that game. Like there's so many here that you just kind of scratch your head at. And even Sherbrooke in the second time that they played, first time that they played, they're held to 187 yards of total offense. Sherbrooke is. And then the next time Sherbrooke explodes for 500 yards of total offense. So defensively certainly has to take a look at things. Offense has to focus on scoring a little bit more, but like the pieces are there. This is one of the teams that we've talked about so far where you're really like, no, guys, like I think you've got it. I think you have the pieces in order to win these games. You just got to put it together.
And that wasn't a Valley club that was putting up major points on anyone last year. So that was as indicative as anything else. Tom, at the end of the day, for a non-OUA team, I think for a club at 2-6, because as much as we want to talk about, you dropped a game to Sherbrooke, you dropped 2 to Concordia, you're in tight against Montreal and Laval. At the end of the day, your record is your record. Excited though we are, I think we have paid them the respect they are due for where they're at. Exciting to see where this club's going to go. The spring is going to be a very exciting period for a number of these players, given all the various, combine draft type stuff going on. I know we read through the draft invitees. I don't recall who it was, maybe from Montreal that was on there. I don't know if you want to pull that up as sort of last words there on the program, so to speak. Our next episode, I won't completely close off because I see you are pulling that up there, so I'll let you sort of add that in. But our next episode, we're heading up to the ranks of the 3 and 5 clubs, and we're heading out back to Can West, and you're not going to want to miss this episode because we have such an awesome guest joining us to talk about the club he's affiliated out with, that Can West team to be determined. So make sure you tune in with that one. But Tom, were you able to pull up the McGill Redbird players who have gotten the call up to the various combines?
So the ones that I can see here, so I've got Felix Olivier Leclerc, who is
the
Ian Barnabas, Jeffrey Amisal Chotelier, a running back who is out there as well. That is for the invitational combine. For the national combine, looking at just ELR, who is invited to go out there. So 4 Redbirds who are represented at the CFL level. We'll be interested to see how well they do.
And does it say what position ELR is invited to?
Quarterback.
Quarterback. All right. Hey, there we go. Mazel tov, ELR. Well, again, a lot of excitement for this team, not only come the regular season, but in the spring with all those other elements going on. We are taking a trip out to the Can West. You're not going to want to miss that one. And you know the place to tune in will be next week right here at the 55.